Look at the ground beneath your feet. It doesn't matter if you were standing on a paved city street, a quiet suburban lawn, or a remote forest trail. If you could peel back the layers of dirt and time, you would find that the Earth is a vast, interconnected graveyard. Anthropologists estimate that roughly 100 billion modern humans have lived and died before us. That means for every single person alive today, there are about 12 dead people buried somewhere in the crust of this planet. Today, we have a highly clinical, deeply sanitized relationship with death. We hand our deceased over to professionals who wash them, dress them, and place them in pristine boxes, or reduce them to clean ash. We visit them in manicured parks with neatly cut grass. But for 99% of human history, there were no funeral homes, no cemeteries, and no laws governing what to do when a body stopped moving. A corpse wasn't a legal or administrative event. It was an immediate, terrifyingly physical crisis. What our ancestors chose to do with that crisis varies wildly across time and space, and their choices challenge everything we think we know about compassion, terror, and what it means to be human. To understand what ancient humans did with their dead, you first have to understand the biological emergency that a corpse creates. The moment a human heart stops beating, the body transforms from a loved one into a massive chemical liability. Within hours, the immune system shuts down, and the bacteria already living inside the gut begin to consume the body from the inside out. This process releases highly volatile compounds like putrescine and cadaverine. To human noses, this is the unbearable smell of rot, but to an apex predator, it is a dinner bell. For a small band of nomadic hunter-gatherers wandering the ancient African savanna were the Ice Age tundras of Europe, a fresh human corpse was a beacon for every hyena, wolf, and big cat within 5 miles. If you stayed near a dead body, you were actively inviting predators into your camp. The earliest and most primitive human response to death was likely incredibly brutal and pragmatic. You ran away.
You abandoned the body where it fell and kept moving to save the living. But at some point in our evolutionary deep past, something shifted. We stopped running away. We began to stay with the dead, even when it was dangerous, and we began to put them in specific places. For a long time, historians believed that this kind of ritual behavior was a luxury reserved only for big-brained modern humans. Then a discovery in South Africa shattered that assumption. Deep within the Rising Star cave system, scientists found an isolated underground chamber, accessible only through a vertical chute so narrow that excavators had to be selected based on their exceptionally thin frames. Inside that chamber lay thousands of fossilized bones belonging to a primitive hominin species called Homo naledi. These creatures lived roughly 300,000 years ago, and they had brains about the size of an orange. Yet their dead were deposited in this impossibly remote chamber. There were no tool marks from predators on the bones, no signs that a flash flood had washed them into the cave, and no evidence that anyone had ever lived inside that pitch-black cavern. To get a heavy corpse into that chamber, these small-brained creatures had to navigate absolute, suffocating darkness through tight stone crevices, likely while carrying burning torches. It is an extraordinary logistical nightmare. Why would a creature with a fraction of our intelligence risk its life to carry its dead deep into the bowels of the earth? The data suggests that even before we had the brains to invent language or art, we had an overwhelming urge to separate the dead from the world of the living, to put them somewhere safe, somewhere dark where the scavengers couldn't reach them. As the human brain expanded, the way we treated the dead evolved from basic disposal into deep emotional preservation. For generations, Neanderthals were stereotyped as lumbering, mindless brutes who lacked the capacity for complex emotion. But archaeological sites across Europe and the Middle East have thoroughly debunked that myth. In Shanidar Cave, located in modern-day Iraq, researchers discovered the remains of a Neanderthal man who had been buried in a carefully excavated grave. When scientists analyzed the soil immediately surrounding his skeleton, they found incredibly high concentrations of ancient plant pollen. The initial conclusion captivated the world. Neanderthals were burying their dead on a bed of bright medicinal wildflowers. While modern scientists still debate whether that pollen was brought in by human hands or simply dragged in by burrowing desert rodents, the broader evidence of Neanderthal burial is undeniable. At sites like La Chapelle aux Saints in France, Neanderthals dug graves specifically tailored to the shapes of their dead, placing the bodies gently into the fetal position, sometimes tucking a hand under the head as if they were merely sleeping. They frequently placed grave goods alongside the bodies, like the jawbone of a red deer or a beautifully crafted stone tool. This requires an immense leap in abstract thinking. When you dig a hole in the earth to fit the exact proportions of someone you love and you leave an object with them that they might need later, you are acknowledging that death is not a complete erasure. You are saying that even though the breath has left this person, they still exist in some form, and they still deserve your protection. But sometimes, the way ancient humans chose to protect and honor their dead takes a form that makes modern stomachs turn. To our contemporary sensibilities, the ultimate act of desecration is to mutilate or consume a human body. But to our ancestors, eating the dead was occasionally the highest expression of love and reverence. Consider Gough's Cave in Somerset, England, which dates back roughly 15,000 years. Archaeologists working in the cave uncovered human bones that showed unmistakable signs of systematic butchery. The flesh had been carefully filleted from the bone using flint knives, the long bones had been cracked open to extract the nutrient-rich marrow, and the skulls had been meticulously broken and shaped into smooth, functional drinking cups.
If you look at this through a modern lens, it looks like a horrific massacre or an act of desperate starvation. But the microscopic analysis of the bones tells a completely different story. The cuts were incredibly precise, matching the exact methodology used to butcher game animals, but executed with a level of care that suggests a ritual performance. This is a practice known as endocannibalism, the ritual consumption of members of your own tribe. In many ancient cultures, allowing a loved one's body to rot in the cold, damp earth or be eaten by subterranean worms was considered the ultimate act of cruelty. It was viewed as abandoning them to the elements. Instead, the tribe would consume the flesh of the deceased. By eating them, you brought their essence, their memory, and their physical material back into the living community. The person quite literally became a physical part of your own body, keeping their strength alive within the tribe. The skull cups weren't trophies taken from slaughtered enemies. They were sacred vessels used in ceremonies to stay connected to the ancestors, to drink alongside them even after they were gone. When humans finally stopped wandering and began to build the very first permanent settlements around 10,000 years ago, our relationship with the dead underwent its final massive transformation. We stopped carrying the dead with us, and we stopped hiding them in remote caves. Instead, we turned them into the literal foundations of our society. In the ancient Neolithic city of Çatalhöyük, located in modern-day Turkey, thousands of people lived in mud brick houses packed so tightly together that there were no streets. People walked across the rooftops and entered their homes through holes in the ceiling. But what is truly staggering is what lay directly beneath their floors. The people of Çatalhöyük didn't build cemeteries outside the city walls. They buried their dead directly underneath the plaster floors of their own homes, right beneath the platforms where they slept, cooked, and raised their children. A single house could contain up to 30 or 40 bodies buried beneath the floorboards over generations.
Every time a family member died, the living would dig up a section of the floor, place the body in the earth, and then replaster and paint over the disturbance. They lived in constant physical proximity to the decaying remains of their ancestors, and it went further than that. After a body had decomposed in the earth for a few years, the family would occasionally dig the bones back up, retrieve the skull, and use clay and plaster to reconstruct the facial features of the deceased, painting the eyes and skin to make them look alive again. These plastered skulls were kept in the house, displayed on benches, or used in daily rituals. The dead were not banished to the margins of life. They were roommates. They were the anchor that tied a family to a specific piece of land. In a world before written deeds or property laws, the bones of your ancestors beneath your bed were your ultimate proof of ownership. They were the evidence that your family belonged to that space because your history was literally woven into the dirt. We have spent the last few centuries trying to build a wall between the living and the dead. We have pushed death behind hospital curtains, hidden it away in industrial facilities, and turned it into something to be feared, ignored, and forgotten as quickly as possible. We view the ancient practices of keeping skulls in the living room, eating the flesh of the deceased, or carrying bodies into pitch-black caves as primitive, morbid, or bizarre. But your ancestors looked at the world differently. They understood that the boundary between life and death is incredibly porous. They knew that the dead don't simply vanish when their hearts stop beating. They processed them, they carried them, they housed them, and they remembered them. We built our very first monuments, our first complex rituals, and our first permanent cities, not to accommodate the living, but to shelter the people who had passed away. We are walking on their ground, breathing the atoms they left behind, and navigating a world that was shaped entirely by how they chose to remember the people they lost.